Jimmy Butler just got traded again. Fifth team in his career. The Miami Heat finally had enough of his attitude, his demands, his complete refusal to play by anyone else's rules. They suspended him 3 separate times this season before shipping him off to Golden State in February. The media called it conduct detrimental to the team. But here's what they won't tell you. This pattern didn't start in Miami. It didn't even start in the NBA. It started when Jimmy was 13 years old, standing in his childhood home, hearing the words that would shape everything that came after. Most people think they know Jimmy Butler's story. The homeless kid who made it to the league through pure determination. The defensive specialist who became a superstar. The culture warrior who holds everyone to impossible standards. But that's just the surface. The real story is darker, more complicated, and explains exactly why Jimmy Butler can't stop burning bridges no matter where he goes. Because what happened to him as a teenager didn't just make him tough. It broke something inside him that money and fame could never fix. At 13 years old, Jimmy Butler walked into his house expecting dinner, homework, maybe some TV before bed. Instead, his mother looked at him with cold eyes and delivered a sentence that would haunt him forever.
I don't like the look of you. You gotta go.
No screaming, no argument, no explanation, just rejection in its purest form, from the one person who was supposed to love him unconditionally. Within hours, Jimmy was homeless. No father to call, no siblings to turn to, no extended family willing to take him in. Just a duffel bag in the streets of Tomball, Texas. This wasn't some temporary punishment or tough love parenting. His mother meant it. Jimmy spent the next several years bouncing from couch to couch, never staying anywhere long enough to unpack his bag. Some nights he slept in cars. Other nights he didn't sleep indoors at all. He kept going to school because he had nowhere else to go during the day. He played basketball because the gym was warm and the coaches didn't ask too many questions. But every single day he went to bed knowing that tomorrow might be the day his current host decided they'd had enough of him too. Most kids in Jimmy's situation don't make it. They drop out, turn to the streets, or simply disappear into the system. The statistics are brutal and unforgiving. But Jimmy had something burning inside him that wouldn't let him quit. It wasn't hope. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was pure, concentrated rage, mixed with an obsessive need to prove that he was worth something, even if his own mother couldn't see it. He learned to read people, to figure out exactly what they wanted from him, and to never, ever let his guard down completely. Eventually, a teammate named Jordan Leslie convinced his family to take Jimmy in. They weren't rich, they already had several kids of their own, but they saw something in this quiet, intense teenager that reminded them of their own children. For the first time in years, Jimmy had a stable place to sleep, regular meals, and people who actually cared about his future. But the damage was already done. Trust didn't come naturally anymore, neither did vulnerability or emotional connection. What came naturally was work. Endless, obsessive, punishing work that turned pain into fuel. With stability came focus, and with focus came the realization that basketball might be his ticket out of Tomball forever. Jimmy wasn't naturally gifted like the kids who dominated highlight reels. He couldn't jump out of the gym or shoot from impossible angles, but he could outwork anyone. And he discovered that his years of reading people and situations made him a defensive nightmare. He anticipated plays before they happened, stripped balls from overconfident opponents, and never, ever gave up on a possession. Coaches started to notice, but college recruiters didn't come calling. Jimmy graduated from Tomball High School without a single Division I offer. Not one. While other senior stars were choosing between multiple scholarships and planning their March Madness debuts, Jimmy was staring at junior college brochures and wondering if his basketball dreams were already over. But quitting wasn't in his DNA anymore. If Division I schools didn't want him, he'd make them regret it. He enrolled at Tyler Junior College, a no-name program where forgotten players went to either resurrect their careers or watch them die quietly in small-town Texas. Tyler JC wasn't glamorous. No ESPN cameras, no packed arenas, no recruiting buzz. Just a gym, a dorm room, and a collection of players who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or given up on by bigger programs. Jimmy fit right in, except for one crucial difference. He played every single possession like his life depended on it. Teammates thought he was crazy. Opponents thought he was trying to hurt someone. Coaches couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't basketball as entertainment or even competition. This was basketball as warfare, and Jimmy Butler was fighting for his soul. Word started to spread about the maniac at Tyler Junior College who guarded opposing stars like they'd personally wronged him. Tom Crean, the head coach at Marquette University, heard the whispers and decided to take a look. What he saw was a raw, unpolished player with average physical tools, but an intensity that couldn't be taught or faked. Crean didn't offer Jimmy a scholarship immediately. Instead, he told him he'd have to earn it. Most players would have been insulted. Jimmy just nodded and said he'd be there. Marquette represented everything Jimmy had never experienced. A real program, legitimate competition, a chance to prove he belonged at the highest level of college basketball. But nothing came easy. Crean pushed him harder than any coach ever had, constantly questioning his ability, his intelligence, his toughness. It wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. The coach saw what Jimmy could become, but only if every ounce of comfortable thinking was burned out of his system. So Jimmy worked. He showed up early, stayed late, dove for every loose ball in practice, and treated every scrimmage like Game 7 of the finals. By his junior year, Jimmy had become one of Marquette's most dependable players. Not their most talented, not their most athletic, but the one teammates and coaches trusted when games got tight. NBA scouts started showing up to watch other prospects, but they kept finding themselves drawn to the quiet guy who never stopped moving, never backed down from a challenge, and seemed to get stronger as games got more physical. His stats weren't spectacular, but his impact was undeniable. Teams played differently when he was on the court. The 2011 NBA draft approached with Jimmy projected as a late first-round pick at best. Scouts praised his work ethic and defensive potential, but questioned everything else. Could he score consistently? Was he athletic enough to guard elite wings? Did he have the offensive skills to justify significant minutes? Team after team passed on him throughout draft night. Superstars were selected. Role players found homes. And Jimmy Butler sat in the green room watching his dreams slip away with each pick. Finally, with the very last selection of the first round, the Chicago Bulls called his name. Pick number 30, the absolute bottom of the first round, barely ahead of the second-round afterthoughts. Jimmy should have been celebrating, but he wasn't. He was calculating. 30 players had been chosen ahead of him. 30 general managers had decided he wasn't worth the risk. That list included every single person he'd eventually spend his career trying to prove wrong. Chicago was Derrick Rose's team when Jimmy arrived. The Bulls were legitimate contenders, packed with veteran talent and championship aspirations. Jimmy was invisible, spending most games on the bench in street clothes, watching the stars he'd studied on television for years. The adjustment was brutal. The speed of the game, the size of the players, the complexity of the systems. Everything was overwhelming. But Jimmy didn't panic. He'd been overwhelmed before. Instead, he did what he'd always done. He outworked everyone around him. While other rookies chased highlights and social media attention, Jimmy chased habits. He studied film until his eyes burned. He lifted weights before practice and stayed after to work on his shot. He memorized every defensive scheme, every opponent's tendency, every possible way to make himself valuable. Veterans noticed his dedication. Coaches appreciated his attitude, but minutes were still scarce. Jimmy averaged 2.6 points per game as a rookie, barely playing in the playoffs. Most young players would have been frustrated. Jimmy was building. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took 2 full seasons of grinding, learning, and waiting for his opportunity. When injuries finally opened a window, Jimmy was ready. He didn't just step into the rotation. He claimed a permanent spot through pure force of will. His defensive intensity was immediately noticeable, but it was his improvement on offense that shocked everyone. The kid who'd struggled to score in college was suddenly getting to the basket, hitting clutch shots, and creating offense through sheer determination. By the 2014-15 season, Jimmy wasn't just a role player anymore. He was an all-star, the most improved player in the NBA, and Chicago's second-best player behind Derrick Rose. The transformation was stunning. He'd gone from afterthought to franchise cornerstone in less than 4 years, all while maintaining the same obsessive work ethic that had carried him through junior college and Marquette. But success brought new challenges, and with those challenges came the first signs of the pattern that would define his career. Jimmy had always been demanding of himself, but now he was demanding of everyone around him. He couldn't understand why teammates didn't share his obsession with improvement. He couldn't accept that not everyone was willing to sacrifice everything for basketball. When he saw players going through the motions in practice or making excuses for poor performances, something inside him snapped. The same rage that had fueled his rise now turned outward, aimed at anyone who didn't meet his impossible standards. The clashes started small. Pointed comments in film sessions, cold shoulders in the locker room, passive-aggressive interviews with the media, but they escalated quickly. Jimmy questioned Derrick Rose's leadership, criticized teammates' work ethic, and made it clear that he thought too many people in the organization were comfortable with mediocrity. Management tried to manage the situation, but Jimmy wasn't interested in compromise. He'd sacrificed too much and worked too hard to watch his championship window close because other people weren't willing to do the same. Chicago eventually traded him to Minnesota, where the pattern repeated itself almost immediately. The Timberwolves had young talent in Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, but Jimmy saw potential being wasted through lack of discipline and preparation. The breaking point came during a now legendary practice where Jimmy showed up late, took the court with third-string players, and proceeded to destroy the starters while talking trash the entire time. "You need me, I don't need you," he reportedly yelled before walking out. The footage never surfaced, but the stories spread throughout the league like wildfire. Jimmy Butler wasn't just a great player, he was a walking chemistry experiment who could elevate a team's ceiling while simultaneously destroying its foundation. Philadelphia tried to harness his intensity for a playoff run, but the fit was awkward and temporary. Jimmy knew he was running out of chances to find a team that truly understood what he brought to the table. That's when Miami called. The Heat weren't just acquiring a player, they were acquiring a philosophy. Pat Riley's organization had always prided itself on toughness, preparation, and an uncompromising pursuit of excellence. Jimmy walked into that building and felt something he'd never experienced before: complete alignment. No one questioned his methods, no one complained about his standards, and no one expected him to tone down his intensity for the sake of comfort. Finally, he'd found a home. What happened next was pure basketball magic. Jimmy led an undermanned Miami team to the 2020 NBA Finals, delivering performances that will be remembered as long as the game is played. In Game 3 against LeBron James and the Lakers, he recorded 40 points, 11 rebounds, and 13 assists in 47 minutes of basketball that bordered on artistic expression. He collapsed into the scorer's table after the game, completely spent, then got up and did it all over again in Game 4. The Heat didn't win the championship, but Jimmy had finally achieved something more valuable than a ring: recognition. No one could question his greatness anymore. No one could call him overrated or label him as just a role player who'd overachieved. He was officially one of the most feared playoff performers in NBA history, capable of single-handedly changing the trajectory of a series through sheer force of will. 3 years later, he did it again. Miami entered the 2023 playoffs as an 8th seed, with no expectations, and a roster full of cast-offs and developmental players. Jimmy didn't care about odds or predictions. In Game 4 against the top-seeded Milwaukee Bucks, he dropped 56 points in one of the greatest individual playoff performances ever recorded. He followed it up with 42 points in Game 5 to eliminate Giannis Antetokounmpo and the league's most dominant regular season team. The run continued through the Knicks and Celtics. Once again, Miami fell short of the ultimate prize, but Jimmy's legacy was secure. He'd proven that star power alone couldn't overcome his combination of skill, preparation, and psychological warfare. Teams feared him not just because of what he could do on the court, but because of how he could expose their weaknesses and insecurities under pressure. He was basketball's ultimate truth-teller, and the truth was often uncomfortable. But even in Miami, the perfect basketball marriage, cracks eventually appeared. The roster aged, the shooting disappeared, and the magic that had carried them to 2 finals became harder to recapture. Jimmy's standards never dropped, but the team's ability to meet them did. Tension built slowly, then exploded during the 2024-25 season when contract extension talks stalled and Jimmy's frustration became impossible to hide. The suspension saga that ended his Miami career was both shocking and completely predictable. Jimmy missed a team flight, clashed with coaches about his role, and reportedly left shoot-around when told he'd be coming off the bench. 3 separate suspensions followed, each one widening the gap between player and organization. The man who'd saved the Heat's season multiple times was suddenly persona non grata, his jersey gathering dust in the back of his locker. When the trade to Golden State became official in February, it felt like both an ending and a beginning. Another bridge burned. Another relationship destroyed by Jimmy's inability to compromise his vision of what basketball should be. But also another chance to prove that his methods work, that his intensity translates to winning, and that teams need him more than he needs them. The Warriors were taking a calculated risk on a 35-year-old player with a history of wearing out his welcome, but they were also getting someone who'd never been outworked by an opponent. The early returns were promising. Jimmy fit seamlessly into Golden State's championship culture, providing the defensive intensity and playoff experience that had been missing from their recent roster. But questions remained. Could he coexist with another alpha personality in Stephen Curry? Would his demanding nature clash with the Warriors' established system? And most importantly, did he have enough left in the tank for one final championship run? What's clear is that Jimmy Butler's story isn't just about basketball success. It's about the cost of excellence and the price of perfectionism. Every team that's traded him has gotten worse immediately after his departure. Every player who's clashed with him has failed to reach the heights he demanded from them. His methods are extreme, his personality is abrasive, and his standards are impossible for most people to maintain. But his results speak for themselves. The 13-year-old kid who got kicked out of his house has spent his entire adult life ensuring that no one could ever reject him again. He's made himself indispensable through work ethic alone, turning pain into power and abandonment into achievement. Whether that's healthy or sustainable is debatable, but whether it's effective is not. Jimmy Butler burns bridges because he'd rather be alone than settle for mediocrity. And maybe that's exactly what Golden State needs to capture one more championship before their window closes forever. Because while Jimmy Butler might be impossible to live with long-term, he's also impossible to beat when it matters most. The homeless teenager who survived by refusing to quit is now a few months away from either validating his entire approach to basketball or watching his career end in disappointment. Either way, he'll do it on his own terms, with his own standards, answering to nobody but himself. The real question isn't whether Jimmy Butler will burn another bridge in Golden State. The question is whether he'll win a championship before he does. And given everything he's overcome to get to this point, betting against him might be the biggest mistake of all.